This was supposed to be the greatest World Cup in history. 48 teams, 16 cities, 3 nations. The biggest, most ambitious, most spectacular football tournament ever staged on planet Earth. And for long stretches of this summer, it has delivered exactly that. Goals of breathtaking brilliance, upsets that have rewritten history, moments that will be talked about by football lovers for decades to come. But there is another story running alongside all of that, one that the official broadcasts are not always showing, one that FIFA has been very, very slow to address. And the longer the silence continues, the louder the questions are becoming. This is the story of what is really happening at the 2026 FIFA World Cup, and why some of the people who love this sport most deeply are beginning to ask whether the organization that runs it is truly in control. Start in Miami, July 3rd, Argentina against Cabo Verde, a match that gave the football world one of the most extraordinary stories of the entire tournament. Cabo Verde, the smallest nation ever to reach the knockout stage of a World Cup, a group of islands in the Atlantic with a population of fewer than 600,000 people, whose players had earned their place on this stage through football of remarkable quality and even more remarkable heart. They had silenced Spain. They had held Saudi Arabia, and in Miami, against the reigning world champions, they came agonizingly close to producing what would have been the greatest upset in the history of the competition. Lionel Messi opened the scoring. Cabo Verde equalized. Argentina edged ahead in extra time. Cabo Verde equalized again, and only a heartbreaking own goal in the dying moments of extra time, followed by a stunning save from Emiliano Martinez to deny Sidney Cabral's free kick, finally ended their journey. It was football at its most beautiful, a small nation proving to the entire world that this sport belongs to everyone, not just to those born in countries with vast resources and long traditions of the game. But what happened around that match told a very different story. In Brockton, Massachusetts, home to the largest Cabo Verde diaspora community in the United States, thousands of supporters had gathered to watch their nation's greatest sporting moment. And they gathered under a curfew, a 10 o'clock restriction placed on local restaurants and gathering venues specifically because of violence that had erupted during Cabo Verde's previous matches. Violence that had left business owners forced to send staff home, turn paying customers away at the door, and watch the end of their nation's World Cup campaign not in the way they had imagined, but in near isolation. One restaurant owner, Eloisa Spinola, described the situation with quiet dignity. She said she understood the need for public safety, but she also said that her community was suffering, that she had been forced to close early, that the celebrations of a footballing miracle had been dimmed by circumstances her community did not create and could not control. Now here is what makes this moment so important. The Cabo Verde supporters were not the ones creating the environment that made a curfew necessary. They were the ones living under its consequences. And where, throughout all of this, was FIFA? Because this is where the story becomes far more uncomfortable. The chaos building around this World Cup has not appeared suddenly. It has accumulated since before the first ball was kicked, across incidents and environments that FIFA has consistently been slow to acknowledge and even slower to address. On June 16th, ahead of Argentina's opening group stage match against Algeria in New York City, clashes broke out between supporters of both nations in Times Square. Videos that circulated widely on social media showed groups of fans exchanging punches and kicks in one of the world's most photographed public spaces in front of thousands of witnesses before police intervened. One person was arrested. No injuries were officially reported, and FIFA issued no public statement on the incident whatsoever.
The tournament was 11 days old. The chaos was already visible, and football's governing body said nothing. Then came the shuttle bus incident near MetLife Stadium. Following a separate event at the venue, fans forced 9 shuttle buses transporting spectators to be abandoned. 5 were destroyed. 1 was set on fire. Again, no injuries were reported. Again, FIFA did not issue any public comment on what had happened to people trying to safely leave one of its own tournament venues. In Mexico, where the energy surrounding the host nation's performances has been extraordinary, the celebrations after victories turned dangerous on multiple occasions. On one particularly devastating night, a driver whose vehicle was surrounded and shaken by celebrating fans accelerated in what appears to have been a panic. 17 people were struck. The driver, attempting to flee, crashed his vehicle and was attacked. He died a week later. 17 people were injured. One man is dead. And the conversation about whether FIFA had done enough to anticipate the crowd management challenges its expanded tournament would create in a city the size of Mexico City has barely begun. Against this backdrop, the question of how FIFA has responded to the concerns of fans from the nations they were supposed to be welcoming becomes almost impossible to avoid. Because here is a detail that deserves far more attention than it has received. Of the 39 countries affected by the United States travel restrictions that have shaped the backdrop of this tournament, many are African nations, island nations, and developing football communities that have spent years building the kind of program capable of qualifying for a World Cup. Nations whose supporters, in many cases, were unable to travel to North America to watch their teams play at all. For the families and communities of nations like Cabo Verde, whose players performed miracles on that Miami pitch, this World Cup offered something extraordinary on the field of play. But for the people who most wanted to be there, the barriers to watching in person were often insurmountable in ways that had nothing to do with ticket prices or travel logistics and everything to do with forces that FIFA chose not to confront publicly. FIFA's president, Gianni Infantino, spoke before the tournament about inclusion, about the World Cup belonging to the world, about football's unique power to bring humanity together regardless of where a person was born or what passport they carried. Those were meaningful words, but words require actions to give them substance. And across the past 4 weeks, the gap between what FIFA said before this tournament and what it has done to protect, include, and speak up for every supporter at this World Cup has grown wider with each passing week. The ticket pricing controversy added another layer of public outrage. Tickets to the final at MetLife Stadium were listed at up to $11,000, drawing criticism from fans, politicians, and even players themselves. Multiple United States state attorneys general launched investigations, and across the internet, supporters who had dreamed of attending a World Cup in North America found themselves priced out of the tournament they had waited their entire lives to witness. These are not small complaints. These are not fringe concerns raised by a handful of discontented voices. This is a growing body of evidence that the 2026 FIFA World Cup, for all the brilliance of its football, has also generated a level of chaos, confusion, and unaddressed hurt that its governing body has been unwilling to confront honestly and directly. And that silence, more than any single incident, is what is beginning to define the off-pitch story of this tournament. Because football supporters have long memories, and when they look back at a World Cup, they do not only remember the goals and glory, they remember how they were treated. They remember whether the organization that ran the event made them feel welcome or made them feel like an afterthought. They remember whether the people in charge spoke up when something was wrong or simply waited for the story to fade. The football on the pitch at this tournament has been, at its best, magnificent. Cabo Verde's run, Morocco's giant killing, Paraguay's penalty heroics, Japan pushing Brazil to the very edge. These are stories that deserve to be celebrated and remembered. but the game inside the stadiums exists within a world outside them, a world of fans who sacrifice enormously to follow their nations, of communities whose pride in their country's footballers is real, deep, and meaningful, of supporters from smaller nations who understand, perhaps more clearly than anyone, what it means to earn a place on the biggest stage in sport. Those supporters deserved better from this tournament than curfews, shuttered restaurants, unaddressed clashes in city streets, and a governing body that has met controversy with silence, more often with leadership. The 2026 World Cup still has extraordinary football ahead of it. Quarterfinals, semifinals, a final that will be watched by more people simultaneously than almost any other event in human history. But the conversation about what happens off the pitch and who is responsible for it is no longer a background story. It is becoming impossible to look away from. FIFA built the biggest World Cup in history. The question now, with the tournament in its final weeks, is whether the organization is prepared to be as ambitious in addressing its failures as it was in expanding its ambitions. Because football belongs to everyone, not just to the nations with the most resources, the longest histories, or the loudest voices. The smallest nations at this World Cup proved that on the pitch every single day. The question is whether FIFA is prepared to prove the same thing off it.